Good afternoon. I am Rachel Humphrey with DEI Advisors, and I am incredibly excited to have with me today Tina Burnett, the Chief Development Officer for G6 Hospitality. Tina, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rachel. Thank you so much for including me. How are you today?
Fantastic. Tina, we're going to spend about 30 minutes together today, and I want to jump right in because I know that you and I could visit for hours on end and still not cover everything we want to talk about. But I wanted to mention, with your permission, that each of the advisors that I have interviewed has had a tremendous impact in some way on me, on my career. And I'm extremely excited for yours because one of the things that's a little different about it is I've actually gotten to watch it happen along the way. And so for others that have had the chance to interview, they were very established in the industry in C-suite seats when I entered the industry 7 or 8 years ago. But I have gotten to see your growth and your progress. And so I want to really thank you for sharing with us today and with everybody else what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to start with a softball. Tell us a little bit about your path to leadership. One of the unique things about the hospitality industry is that everybody has a different path to where they are today. So tell us a little bit about yours.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. You've been very instrumental in it. So thank you. You've always been a huge advocate for women and really kind of pulled me along in some situations. But honestly, I originally in hospitality started in the restaurant business. But after I got married, my husband and I actually relocated to Dallas, and I took a job just as an assistant in the franchise team. When we first got here, we had lived in Dallas a week, and the rest is history. So I've been here like 24 years. So I've done a lot of things, but always in franchise. I loved the part of franchising, even though we were a really small part of what Motel 6 was back when I started. There were only 23 franchises when I took my job. So now there's over 1,400. So we've really kind of, grown that side of the business. But I've done a lot of different things inside of, the franchise side, but probably the most instrumental that got me to where I was today was when I took the jump to go out into the field and start selling franchises to people. Took me way out of my comfort zone. And, but I had supported that team for so long. The only thing I didn't know how to do was actually close the deal. So, luckily I've had people all along the way, which is a lot of what we want to talk about, that have pulled me up and positioned me in different situations and given me training and access to a lot of things that I might not have been given access to had we not been such a really small part of the organization and growing so much over the course, kind of my career. So for after I was in the field, I obviously came back in and started overseeing the teams. And that's when the trajectory kind of really took off. And then also just obviously over the last 5 years under Rob's leadership, he really pushed me and got me out of my comfort zone in a couple of different situations to really guide me into where I am today.
Well, that's incredible. I did not know that that's how you got your start with Motel 6, but such a familiar story of so many in hospitality, starting with entry-level positions and working their way up. And there's a lot of ways that you can continue to develop skills. What have some of yours been? And I want to talk about executive coaching a little bit separately in a minute, but what have some of the resources been or the opportunities you've had to really develop your skill set as you were transitioning to each of these new roles or to be ready to accept a new role when it was presented?
I was always the person that asked if there was anything else I could do. That was kind of innate as to who I was. Just, my parents taught me that, if you're doing things and you want to learn more about something, then, offer to help in a different situation. So I did that very early on. So, I learned how to write the property improvement plans. Dean Savis, which very well, would sit down. And at the time, they used to carry camcorders around properties. So we would watch videos, which is really kind of frightening. And we'd watch videos and literally he would teach me how to look at, oh, there's this crack in the wall, or this could be this, or, we need to pay attention to things. So I think there's been a lot of situations where I've taken on new roles that has given me just a broader perspective of how, the whole organization went together. And just the lodging, the lodging industry in general. I think that's kind of been a real eye-opening experience as well, because I mean, while I've grown up in Motel 6 and Studio 6, I didn't have a broader knowledge of hospitality until, I got a little further on in my career and was given access to conferences and things like that. So.
Well, that's one thing we hear a lot from people is how important attending the conferences are, going to the sessions, networking with people there. And certainly that is where you and I have gotten to spend a lot of our time together. I want to talk a little bit about the executive coaching, because the first time I learned that you were working with an executive coach was when she actually called me to ask me about you and your leadership and skills in developing other things. And I was blown away. It was the first time somebody had reached out to me for that. I became probably obsessed with it, not just for you, but for myself then, and for recommending it for others. Tell me a little bit about how executive coaching has played a role in your development, and maybe things that you've learned in that path that you might not have learned through other channels.
Yeah, there's been 3 different situations where, whether it was an executive coach or just coaching in general, that the company provided along the way. So the first one, we did a whole leadership program inside of our organization. We had to go meet with Korn Ferry. We got put through a ton of real life examples. That piece probably taught me the most about myself, because they threw me into situations and then we interacted. And even though it was, kind of all set up, you didn't realize it, that it was happening, and what you were saying and things that you constantly, you kind of lean back in on what you know best and how to really grow from that. But then there was also, when I took over, managing our whole team, I was really going from being one of them to managing my peers. And so the organization brought in a coach in that situation, just really how to distinguish yourself, not above, but at leading your teams versus being them. But the executive coach that I got, that you're speaking of, was my favorite. She was fantastic. And she really taught me that, because I have been in this organization for so long, one of the biggest things she said to me was, you've got to unpack your backpack, because you just keep taking things with you, right? Because it's what you know, and you've done the job, and and those type of things. So it's very easy for you to keep those with you. But if you don't empty it, you're never going to be able to get into the C-suite or in that, really large role, because you're going to be so down here in the weeds that, you're not going to be able to really succeed in that situation. She was also really good at holding, all executive coaches are, but she had a really innate way of holding me accountable and being like, are you sure you should have done that in that situation? Or how could you have done it differently? And it just really made me take a step back. I'm kind of a do and then think about it sometimes, because we're always moving so fast just in the world we live in. And she really taught me to kind of go, wait a minute, and I'll catch myself, because it's very easy for me to do that. But she was really good at just really, kind of saying stop and calling me out when I needed to be called out. But it really developed me so differently than I thought. And it taught me so much more about some of the roles I was headed into, because you think, oh, I'm going on this path. My boss does the same thing I do, just at a different level. And it's so different when you get in, especially into the C-suite, of just what you're really dealing with around the company versus just your groups and your organization, the organization underneath you.
Well, that's incredible advice too. And I think that I have experienced, like you have, as you continue to grow that career, your relationship with your team members may also change. And that's a big adjustment to make. And having help both in that sense and holding yourself accountable is great. You talk about being in a company that has tremendous mentors and champions of all, but especially of women, and that you have had many of them. And now I've also seen on the other side where you are championing and mentoring others, some at my specific request, actually. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the role that mentors and champions have played in your career, and why it's so important for you to find time to do that for others now.
Mentors and champions can really, really open the doors and really, and get you where you want to be. they see strengths in you that you don't see yourself. They help you build on those strengths. And I didn't have it when I was young in my career, right? It wasn't a big deal then. Back then, there wasn't a lot of mentoring. There wasn't a lot of things that just in the general, 24 years ago, it just wasn't as big a push as it is today. And I remember sitting in my very first review and my boss going, well, where do you want to be in 5 years? I was like, I don't know. Where do you want me to be? Like, it was literally one of those kind of like, oh my gosh. And I was like I started stressing out just sitting there talking about it. But when you have mentors and champions, I mean, they help guide you through a lot of those, navigation points in your career. And I try so hard now to ensure, especially our younger, team members that are just coming out of college and some of those things, that they have those connections to create those mentors and champions, even if it's not specifically assigned, right? Organic mentors to me are probably some of the best because they're not like, oh, I have to help you, I have to sit down, but when you connect with someone and I see something about myself in them, it's so much easier for me to be like, hey, let me help you get to where you want to be. But it's also good to have those that are assigned because like the lady that you asked me to meet with, I wouldn't have ever really gotten to know her in that way. And so it also helps just give back and help young people who have really great ideas that maybe just need a little molding from not necessarily inside their organization, but outside. It's just something that you can't get anywhere else, in my opinion. It's so critical to let someone help you and know that you don't have to do it all on your own, but you've also got someone in your corner, right? And that's sometimes you need that, especially when things are kind of getting really chaotic, is to know that you've got people in your corner that are fighting for you and helping you.
One of the things that I think is really special about the hospitality industry as well is people say yes when asked, either picking up the phone and calling and saying, I have a question, or wanting to know how to do something or help make a decision, evaluating risks and other things. You rarely hear about anybody picking up the phone and calling someone and that person not wanting to help or not offering to help. And so I love to hear how you have both accepted it and passed it on as well. One of the other areas that I have delighted in watching your career take off is with public speaking. I remember early on the first panels, and certainly at your conference having a much larger role as your career was going up your corporate ladder with G6. But talk a little bit about public speaking, how you prepare for it, how do you feel doing it? Highs and lows. What do you think about the importance of it? And public speaking can certainly mean more than just your conference in front of thousands of people. It can also mean in a boardroom or in a department meeting. So how do you prepare for it? And tell us a little bit about your strategies for public speaking.
Yeah. I still get nervous. I think if you don't, then, you lose some of the fun in doing it. But you're right. I mean, public speaking can be very different. It can be on a panel at a conference in a room full of 20 people. It can be on a panel, in front of thousands, or it can be you and I, even today. I mean, we got ready to get on. I'm like, okay, I don't want to, for me, the hardest part is I'm so much better off the cuff, but you get to that point, like in your career, right? You're always representing not just yourself, you're representing your company. And so you're always like, okay, I've got to hit this key highlight, or I've got to hit this point. And once I start getting into that, I get really nervous that I'm going to miss, like, oh, there was something I wanted to say. And, obviously it's easier when you're public speaking, when you're talking on something that you're very familiar with and very comfortable with. But, you get Q&A. And when you're in those situations, it teaches you to be very thoughtful and intentional on what you're saying. And so whether that's in the boardroom or at a panel and, in front of hundreds of people, you still have to be intentional and understand, what the question is and answer it. I mean, none of us like politicians when they don't answer the question, it's always like, they didn't answer the question. And I don't ever want to be that person, but sometimes you're like, oh gosh, I missed that point, and you don't want to do it. But, I think being prepared is a big thing. If you're not prepared, I can go down bunny trails and people get nervous in silence. It's okay for silence as well. And, you hear people, they keep talking and talking and talking because it's, there's silence. And so understanding when to just stop and then when to actually interject and be comfortable with what you're talking about.
That's great advice. And I love the idea too of speaking off the cuff. I think it's really important for all of us to only accept opportunities where we know we can speak comfortably. I agree 100% of the time. When I'm done, I think of the millions of things that I wanted to say and probably will at the end of our time together today. You spoke a few minutes ago about going to conferences and learning a lot through that process. I actually remember a long time ago, you and I were on a panel together about networking, women in networking.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how you have built relationships in the industry that are maybe particularly suited to your personality, how you network might be very different how I do or how I relationship build. So what are the strengths of yours that you have really adapted into your relationship building process?
Gosh, networking for me is, I like to get comfortable with people. I can talk to everyone in the room. I don't really, have a problem with that. But getting really comfortable in learning about having a reason to be connected or networked with someone, because it can get overwhelming, right? You can belong to a lot of different networking groups, but you need to figure out, where do you want to spend your time? How do you want to use this networking event, situation, person, at the end of the day, and really, watering that relationship, for lack of a better word, right? Like, so a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to go network and I'm going to, hi, how are you? And that's great. But when you start, especially in our industry, we see each other at all the different conferences, and you could spend your entire day with, maybe with people that aren't really going to influence, or, they do something so completely different that you do need to learn about what they do. So understanding how that builds the relationship for you yourself, because obviously they teach you that networking is to help, to help grow yourself or grow your network and things like that. But understanding that you don't have to network with everyone, but making them very intentional, for me, was what I found was most successful in my networking. Because a lot of times I'd get through a room and be like, okay, I don't even know who I talked to. Right. Where when I really took a step back and said, okay, I want to meet with these 5 people. I know they're here. That was my reason for being here. But it's interesting because other people who do that are some of the people I probably wouldn't have spoken with that sought me out. And those relationships have been even more influential as, I've moved in my career. So I think it's understanding what you want from networking, because it's critical, but it doesn't always have to be in a huge room. It can be one-on-one. It can be, over Zoom. It can be a phone call, coffee, anything that just, helps build and support, where you are and what you need in your career at the time.
I love the intentionality and having a strategy behind it as well. I think that that's great advice. In keeping with the theme of continuing to grow, one of my favorite panel questions is always, what advice would you give to your younger self? And the reason I like it so much is because I think we are all constantly reflecting and evolving. And so it's interesting to look back and see what we would tell ourselves. And because of that, that's why I love hearing it from everybody else. So tell me, what would you tell 22-year-old Tina?
Oh, goodness. Not to take myself so seriously. I think, when you first start growing your career, you feel like everything you do is going to hinge your next step, right? Rob says something all the time. It's okay to fail. Just fail fast and move on.
Yeah.
And I think people get so caught up in the failure that they forget that, we all make mistakes. It's okay. And honestly, have a lot more fun. I think the younger generation is so good at this. They celebrate everything, right? And so learning that you've got to celebrate your successes, as well as understand, where you're falling short. But I think especially us as women, we're really hard on ourselves. And so, especially when you're starting a career or starting a family or getting married, and there's so much going on, not to take yourself so seriously and understand that, your growth is not going to be exponential all at one time, that it's okay if you kind of level out for a while and move on. But yeah, that's probably what I tell myself. Don't take yourself so seriously and have a little more fun along the way.
I
It's a
love
great industry,
Yeah.
and, so.
I love the idea of celebrating successes too. I think you're right. We're the first to jump on ourselves if something
Yeah.
doesn't go exactly like we want it to, and probably the last to celebrate the good successes. So that's great advice. When you do face those challenges, though, what are some of the strategies that you use or the personality traits that you rely on to overcome those challenges?
So in my personal life, I have dealt with my fair share of just a lot, right? So, and that has innately made me a fighter. I'm an only child. Both my parents are deceased already. So, but while I say that, I am a fight or flight person, and so my initial thing when a challenge or an obstacle comes up in front of me is I'm like, yeah, you know what? We're going to take the easy road. I'm out, right? And I have to really sit down and manage myself. My mentor or coaches or board of directors, for lack of a better word, my own internal people, are usually best at helping me with this, because I can, in a safe space, I can say, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't, do whatever is in front of me. And we can break it down in chunks, and we can, by the time you get off of that phone call, or even breaking it down into small little bite-sized pieces to get through the obstacle, once I figure out my plan, I'm usually like, okay, I got this, let's go do it. But you've got to get yourself there, right? You've got to challenge yourself to say, okay, stop, take a deep breath, this challenge, and forge a plan instead of just running the other way, which is always seems easier. It never is, but but you've got to find your fight inside of you, right? You've got to figure out what gets you to that place instead of being like, yeah, somebody else can do this, or, I'm not going to handle this situation. I'm going to get someone else to do it. So I think you've just got to understand personally how you get there and what's the best path for you to do it. For me, it's breaking it down and getting a plan, and a lot of times bouncing that off of someone else before you go into, the whole challenge or obstacle ahead.
Let's talk a little bit then about support systems and how you identify. I also use the phrase a personal board of directors, and it may be people in my social network, professional network, family members, colleagues, others who, depending on the situation. How do you identify who you can really rely on for that support system? And then under what circumstances might you reach out to them?
It's interesting because when I first heard, there was a Wall Street Journal article, I think late last year or whatever, about this whole personal board of directors concept. And at first, I heard it. I was actually driving down the road and I was like, well, that seems kind of weird, but it made me kind of pause. And I was like, wait a minute. And as they started like identifying all these people that are in your life, I was like, oh yeah, I got that person. Oh yeah. And you kind of like think about it. But for me, it varies. I've been fortunate enough that I've worked at the same company for a long time. So some of my support system is internal, and sometimes other people aren't as lucky to have that, especially when you're first starting at a company. But I've worked with some of these people for 24 years. If I can't walk into a room and go, you got to help me, I need your honest opinion. We've been fortunate around that. So I do lean into that. It's interesting. It's so critical for us to seek out support systems from women, but it is even more critical to seek out a support system for men, because there are a lot of men in this industry that want to pull women up with them. And when you find those, they have such a different perspective. A lot of things aren't very emotional with them. It's very business, and, women bring the emotion to the boardroom. That's what they like. But having that joint support system and just what that brings to me individually I've reached out to them for all sorts of things, especially when I was getting ready to take the chance and go into the field and be a salesperson. That was not me. And I talked to several people that were in my board of directors just around, okay, can I really do this? Like, am I really going to be able to pull this off? And not one person said no, but I know that there were a couple that if they had, they would have said it to me. And that's what you need. You need those people that are willing to call you on it, and say, this probably isn't a good idea. This isn't your strength.
It's interesting how similar that is to the executive coach that you found most successful as well. It's just people being honest with you in return. And I think that that's a great thing to have. I also think the idea on the support system of when you fall, of people, if we allow our support system voices to be louder than those in our head, then we're going to come out okay at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We let the voices in our head control it. Oftentimes that's where, we are less successful. One of the things that I'm going to switch gears for a minute because I know we're going to run out of time, but, there's a generalization, of course, that women are not good at advocating for ourselves.
Yeah.
Have you, you have been in an environment for a couple of decades now that's been incredibly supportive of women, where you have been able to find your voice and use it well. What would you tell people who might be struggling to advocate for themselves? And what does that phrase really mean for you?
It's funny because one of the questions you had asked me to think about was how do you rate yourself? I don't rate myself that well. I encourage everyone on my team. If you want to take on new roles, if you want to do those things, there is always an open door to do that. I typically try to cross my team as well. So they get out of their comfort zone of just what they were hired to do and things like that. And I think it helps them learn how to advocate for themselves. Like, I was put here for a reason. So, okay, let's figure out what that really means to me. But a lot of women shy away from it. I mean, it's really hard. It's hard for us to say, hey, I'm really good at that. Like, and I should get this position, or I should, get to work on this project or whatever. It's really hard for us to do that. And so I think the biggest thing is just encouraging that type of open culture inside of your teams and the people that you're working with and those type of things. But I think also they have to see us do it, right? So they have to see us advocating or being very vocal about advocating for them, because it gives them that voice they may not have. Like you're saying, their voice in their head is probably telling them no. But sometimes when we as leaders vocalize it for them in a setting that's not embarrassing, but just, oh, well, Michelle's got that. Like, she's absolutely, whoever that you're talking about gives them also that voice and that ability to truly kind of, I do have this, but I think that, for me personally, my advocacy for myself ebbs and flows. It sometimes, once you get really comfortable, it's always harder in a new position or in a new company or anything like that. But, once you really have it, I think you do more advocating than you have in the past. But I think sometimes it's really just knowing in your heart of hearts that it's okay for me to say I'm good at this. Like, that's not a bad thing to do. Yeah. And so many of us don't see that as a skill. So
I think this, in addition to self-care, are the two that I'm really good about coaching others on and really bad following my own advice. So yeah. I think those are the top two for me. All right. We have time for just two quick final questions. One is, in this day and age, they talk about the importance of having a personal brand. What do you want to be known for? What is Tina Burnett's personal brand?
Well, for those that know me and know me well, I don't have a lot of filter. So I'm probably open and honest, which is probably why I like all of my mentors and my, my support system to be that same way. I'm results driven, but not only for our company, honestly, for our owners. I mean, it's, that our brands bring to them. So I think it's just really that core of open, honest integrity, and just having that sense of family, whether it's in our organization or with our customers as well.
I love that.
That
Well, I
really
certainly know you as each of those things for sure. Um, Keeping in mind DEI Advisor's motto of empowering personal success, we've touched on a lot of things and could cover all of them in much greater detail as well as some others. Tell me what would be one thing we haven't talked about so far that you would tell people as they begin to contemplate and empower themselves for their own career journeys.
Yeah, I think mostly that to understand that ongoing career advancement, and success is a long game, right? I think we have, um, it's a career, and whether it's with the same company or not, you need to figure out where you want to grow and develop, and position yourself for that. And while it's really good to own and know that you're really good at your own work and be really responsible, it's also really important to learn how to collaborate with each other and really hold each other up, not only in your own organization, but success shouldn't be a competition. And I think that's so much more evident now than it ever has been. And I think you guys are doing a great job at just, really pushing that message, and that, we all need to help each other be successful and lift each other up, and empower yourself for your continued success.
That's a fantastic way to close it out. Tina Burnett, thank you so much for joining DEI Advisors. Thank you for your industry leadership and all that I have learned from you, and for our friendship as well. But thank you so much for being a part of the show today.
No, the honor's mine. You're so dear to me. So thank you for including us.
Thank you.